Welcome back. Now we're going to be talking about designing around trees and specifically how design levels can impact trees. We'll go through cut and fill around trees. As we've mentioned, these can have a major impact on the trees and the structure of the trees at the end of the project. We'll talk about root damage. We'll go through what some tree-sensitive design methods are and what that means, and some tips about landscape specifications around existing trees. So we've seen that one of the most important things of designing around trees is to avoid cut or excavation as much as possible. So I've got here a tree's root system in plan view, and I want to show you how designing a structure that has a footing will impact on the tree's root system overall. So we've got this footing that could be a building or a landscape seat coming through this section of the tree's root system. You might start digging the footing and find that there's only two large roots there, and you might think, it's only two roots, the tree's got other roots, it'll survive. But as we can see, the two roots join to the rest of the root system, which is where all the feeder roots are that keep the tree alive and functioning and thriving. So if we were to just come through and put a structure there, we not only lose the structural roots at the side of the tree, we also lose almost half of the tree's root system that it needs to feed and take up water and nutrients. So here's a good example of how footings can be placed around trees carefully so that they avoid damaging the roots. This deck has obviously got a few footings and it's quite close to a tree. So the way that you would achieve doing this without damaging the tree is you dig the holes first to find out if there are roots there or not and adjust accordingly to make sure that you're not damaging the roots that are there. And here's an example of low impact landscaping around a tree. You've got a seat that's very low impact. It's just sitting on top of the ground. It doesn't need large footings that could disrupt more roots, and you've got some small markers along the side of the path that don't have large footings. So we've talked about excavation and how that can seriously damage trees' structure and vitality. But what about fill? If we were to place a large area of fill over the top of the root system, almost half of its root system, that would damage the tree as well. Not quite as bad as cutting the roots, but it would smother the roots and stop them from taking in as much water, nutrients and oxygen that they need to survive. Well, luckily there are ways that we can work around trees to avoid these pitfalls. So we refer to something called tree-sensitive design and construction methods. This is something that we need to take into consideration from the beginning of the design process. We need to be thinking about protecting trees and actively trying not to damage the trees by the way that we design what we're planning to construct. So the three important parts of tree-sensitive design methods are to actively protect trees during the design process, to think about how we can avoid damaging the trees, and to involve a project arborist or a consulting arborist at the beginning of the process so we know which trees to prioritise and how we can go about protecting them throughout the process. So one last tip is when you're specifying landscape works around existing trees, we want to make sure that we're minimising or avoiding soil scraping and removing the topsoil where the tree's roots are likely to be, because this can seriously damage the trees even further than all the other construction and works that have gone on around the tree. And secondly, we want to make sure that the plants that we're planting are in smaller container sizes so that we're not digging lots and lots of holes near the tree that will again damage the roots. So make sure that you consider these factors when you're starting your design process. Thanks for watching again, and I'll see you in the next video.